Chapter 13. By the givers, Vittoria thought she couldn't get any more frightened than she'd been with Hodei, but this awful arena beat everything else for fear.
"Tell me what happened with Hodei,"
Banat said for the 5th time.
"Your face. How did you escape? What did he say?"
Later, Banat.
"Lady."
Please. She pressed her fingers to the wounded, stinging cheek. The blood had dried, thankfully, but it still hurt. Your man found me outside the castle as soon as I climbed free and brought me here safely. Everything ended well. That's enough for now. Let me focus on Mateo, and then I'll confess everything. Her knees still felt weak and wobbly hours later, like jellyfish dead on the sand at low tide. Her face flushed, and her heart raced. She felt weak as she tried not to cling to the glass, tried to affect a brave face. Forcing all her attention on Mateo helped. 5 hours! It's been 5 hours, Banat. 5 hours of no sound, no word, no sign. How much longer?
"Lady, please sit. Have some food, or—"
A shout broke the silence from the depths of the arena. This wasn't just any shout. That was agony. Guttural, deathly agony. And there was no doubt who it belonged to. Vittoria sucked in a sharp breath and pressed herself against the glass, as if that would allow her to see him. Even the bustling landowners, with all their food and laughter and flirtation, fell into utter, stony quiet. Banat? Her breath fogged the glass as she spoke. He stood behind her to peer over her shoulder. All eyes seemed trained on the open space near the tunnel where both Romeo and Mateo would appear, if they survived. Ice shot through her body when, minutes later, another desperate shout rose from the jungle.
"Romeo!"
Vittoria reached out to clutch Banat's hand.
"He's alive, lady. That's something."
Her heart bruised itself against her ribs as she waited an interminable amount of time. Just when the landowners started stirring and speaking among themselves again, movement came from the edges of the jungle. The witch named Balta advanced out of the tunnel, and Vittoria's heart leapt into her throat. Romeo appeared out of the saw too, holding a panther whelp. A whelp? She thought. What in the givers? He was a bit bloodied and his shirt shredded, it appeared, but largely fine. Vittoria swallowed hard as Balta carefully accepted the yowling whelp and handed it to another witch behind him. How had Romeo emerged alive? Would Mateo? Then Balta clapped Romeo on the shoulder with a wide smile. Romeo kept his back to the jungle and nodded, bending over as if exhausted. Seconds later, a team of witches surrounded him. Apothecaries, likely. Landowner cheers drowned out the blood rushing past her ears. Almost as an afterthought, Mateo appeared. A whelp dangled carefully from one hand. Vittoria let out a little cry of relief, then alarm. There's blood everywhere. His arm. Something has happened to his arm. Even Balta paused at Mateo's appearance, then shook his head and accepted the whelp. The raucous landowners quieted, no doubt thirsty for the gory story. Balta spoke with Mateo. Mateo nodded once, then shifted his weight as if to ensure he'd remain standing. His shoulders were heavy. She couldn't see his face from this angle. Balta turned to the crowd.
"The test of courage,"
he called, his voice ringing on a magical spell,
"is completed on both accounts to my satisfaction. Both will advance to the second test."
The pervasive sense of disbelief shattered moments later. Cheers erupted again. Mateo dropped to his knees, forehead pressed to the ground, as Balta advanced on him. Romeo disappeared into the tunnel with his team of witches, but without a glance over his shoulder.
"Come, lady,"
Banat murmured with relief in his voice.
"Balta will bring Mateo back home. Let us prepare to take care of him."
Inky darkness comforted Vittoria as she sat next to Mateo, watching his chest rise and fall. A shiver slipped through her every now and then when Hodei's wrinkled face appeared in her mind's eye.
"It all comes down to that one single question. Why did she stay?"
Her mind spun fast as a whirlpool and twice as violently. Why was she the only witch who could find the answer? Why did it matter? Her bleary eyes burned like a vat of seawater had been poured into them. It must be almost dawn. She rubbed her face, nearly lulled to sleep by the gentle roar of the ocean. Hodei was just a bitter old man, likely. She didn't know Esperanza's whole story, but it must be cloaked in deceit or something worse. Had Esperanza fooled him somehow? If so, why hadn't he found the information he craved sooner? What was his game? Were these just deathbed questions? Or was there something more he wanted Vittoria to discover? He'd spoken bitterly of Romeo, of borrowed power. An opportunity to get rid of her, possibly, while casting the blame elsewhere. If she went to the rebels and started asking around, they'd probably kill her. She'd almost be safer with landowners. At least they believed in honor. The rebels had falsely twisted fate to their own purposes, and that was just as terrifying. Still, the High Priest's threat loomed large in her mind. Hodei had so easily taken her from Banat, had known so much about her family. Even with Mateo protecting them, might a powerful man like Hodei get the best of them? Was he really allowing her to live? The biggest question loomed in her mind like a bubble, crowding out all the other thoughts that vied for her attention. Would she tell Mateo? The arguments for and against moved like the tide, ebbing and flowing. Yes, she should tell him everything. The threat to her family, the strange request. She could trust Mateo, and he didn't control her. But would he stop her? No, came the rebuttal. She couldn't tell Mateo. Her family was at stake. And, perhaps, she felt a flicker of curiosity. What was Hodei's motivation? What if there was more that a little searching would reveal? Was there something bigger at work here? Mateo stirred. She straightened, breath held, and untangled herself from thoughts of Hodei. A female witch, an apothecary, awaited them at the house when they'd returned. Mateo arrived shortly thereafter, transported by Balta, who left immediately. The apothecary had used magic to straighten Mateo's bones and clean the puncture wounds that had been so deep they were nearly black. Then she dumped a viscous green potion over the top. It sizzled and smoked with a painfully disgusting smell.
A rare potion called remoulade,
she'd murmured when Vittoria hovered anxiously nearby.
Most expensive potion on the market. His bones will heal fast with how much I used. In time for the test of magic at any rate. Fool. Lots of blood loss. Puncture wounds indicate bloodsuckers. He'll need to drink a lot of water. Hold off on any strong ipsum for the time being.
Vittoria had been relieved when she left. Mateo, thankfully, had remained unconscious for the entire time. She'd held his hand while she waited for him to wake up, gratefully aware of every breath. A white bandage covered his left arm all the way to the bicep, with no blood peeking through. Perhaps the potion had served him well already. His eyelashes fluttered open. With a sharp intake of breath, he sat up in a panic.
The whelp.
Vittoria rested a calming hand on his naked shoulder.
Mateo, you're home. The whelp is already reunited with its mare. It's over. It's over.
Until she whispered those words, she wasn't sure she'd fully comprehended it herself. His eyes were cloudy still, no doubt with pain. He winced and lay back, his torso slowly relaxing against the pillows. One moment at a time, the clouds parted in his eyes until he looked at her with utter fatigue and disbelief. She sat with him on her right. No candles lit the dark, hiding the marks on her left cheek. Unable to help herself, she reached out and brushed a lock of hair off his forehead. He closed his eyes and leaned into her palm. She cupped his face.
You did it, Mateo. We did it. Romeo didn't betray me. He could have. He so easily could have. He said something odd.
The whole story hadn't surfaced yet, though Banat said various speculations had been circulated in the news books. She didn't care what the gossip said. It was over.
You're tired. Go back to sleep. I'll be here if you need anything.
He chuckled, then nuzzled his face into her palm. His breath was warm and wispy against her wrist.
I don't want to sleep. I want to stay here with you.
She leaned forward and used the tip of her finger to trace a line down the side of his face, then his jaw. She did it again and again until his expression softened. He looked like a Nico, almost, with his thick eyelashes closed and his body slack with rest.
Not fair,
he murmured drowsily. She quietly laughed.
My nephew has taught me the subtle art of soothing finicky males.
His eyes opened again, clear as a midnight sky.
Stay with me, please.
Vittoria gave him a soft smile.
Of course. Go to sleep, Mateo. I won't leave your side.
His eyes closed. He dropped into sleep.